And I think good afternoon, good evening, good morning, willkommen, bienvenue, and hello. It's the Thursday night podcast, or ASTV as people call it, complete with our normal technical issues,
Yeah,
as we always have.
par
As
for
we
the
always
course.
have. Yes, par for the course. Trevor, how are you?
Other than said technical issues, I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself?
Well, if I didn't have the technical issues, everything would be fine and dandy. But yes, who needs computers in their lives? Podcasters. That's who needs them.
Yeah.
So I think it's time for an old upgrade on the laptop. But greetings from Alan there. Nice to see the regulars back again. This week, a very, 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 very weird week. Obviously, with us not being in the latter stages of European competition, it just feels weird and off. And then, a strange game against Arsenal. 2-2, not a loss, but a game of, again, two halves, as we've been saying consistently throughout the season. Um, but the biggest thing for me this week so far, Trevor, is it could be newspaper rumor, it could be just agents talking, etc., etc. But we have expressed a closure of our interest in Jude Bellingham. If true, doesn't say much for our ambitions or possibly our finances. But what do you think of that particular ripe, juicy apple of gossip?
Yeah, and when that started kind of dissipate through let's say less than reputable channels, and then it kind of became more and more of something that people not necessarily within the club, but they're in the know, were going, yeah, this is there's there's a bit more fire behind this smoke. And throughout our Discord channel, where if you haven't joined yet, please do so as soon as you possibly can. After this, obviously, don't go away and then come back. Just wait a little bit. That little aside, I don't get it. I don't know why the line has been drawn in the sand this early. There's something afoot that we don't as fans know, and that's not a good thing. Not saying that we all have to be completely in the know at all times, but there's just a lot of things that are not looking too great in terms of, like you said, the ambition. And I think it's the I don't think it's entirely a finance thing, because it was always going to be something where that price tag was going to either go up through the season, or it was going to kind of stagnate. It was never going to go down. So saying they were either caught off guard or thought differently is either just naivete or just complete bullshit. And whatever one they want to own up to on that front is fine. If you want to look like a idiot or you want to look like a bullshit artist, that's basically where I'm at with FSG on the Bellingham front. But now, as also we've talked about in countless circles, if they go and get three or four midfielders, yeah, maybe none of them are going to be of Bellingham's top flight caliber. But if you get guys that can work in Klopp's system and kind of refresh things, and get some guys that are willing to run and are, not completely dead or completely crap, I'll take that as a net positive in my eyes.
In terms of developing the squad, we've obviously pretty much every Liverpool podcast, I would imagine, and a few non-Liverpool ones have spoken about our midfield woes this season. Um, if you're Jurgen Klopp, what do you think? Let's just say you thought that Jude Bellingham would properly and legitimately be on the cards, and then now you're being told there's no way we're going to pay for him. It's just not fiscally responsible if we're not in the Champions League, etc., etc., etc. Do you get mightily pissed off and say, "But what about the Champions League money I've been earning for you the last few years?" Or do you say, I get it. We don't want to be, we don't want to be Leeds in the early 2000s, but at the same time, we need some bloody midfielders of quality. So what's the next plan?
Yeah, that I believe is something that the board and upper management have to relay to Jurgen and Ernest and have genuine, honest conversations and don't talk out of both sides of their mouth. Go to him, hey, I understand that there's been steady Champions League money, there's been steady deep cup run money, there's been steady sponsorship money coming in, and there's been times where we've splashed the cash for you, but there's also been times where you've asked for certain reinforcements, and we've stood our ground and said no, whether that be on principle in terms of they didn't see the same vision, or it was just a straight money thing. We don't know where those kind of parameters are within how they run the transfer policy at this stage of the game, because there's so many different working parts where they're still trying to get either investment or they're trying to get out entirely. There's a lot of deals that are potentially looking to see where teams finish at the end of this year, because if Brighton ends up in European places, they're not going to want to have to do a fire sale. If there's certain guys in Italy that sneak into the top four, they're not going to want to have to sell off all their best young players because they'll need them for Champions League next year. There's a lot that can go into just these conversations, but they need to be had between the higher ups and Klopp, and not done in a fashion of, well, you did this and you did that, you did this, you did that. Just genuine conversations where they can kind of formulate a strategy and realize if Jurgen wants to be part of what they're selling, basically.
In terms of I think a finger pointing exercise is a possibility in any talks like that. But do you think for Jurgen Klopp, he's responded to comments, I believe, if I remember correctly, this season about that whole 7-year itch thing, that 7-year dip at Dortmund in Mainz, or whatever they're called, beans, means, minds. That's the way I'm going to say it. And it obviously rankled with him that this seemed to be a pattern that he was getting called out on. So do you think he's looking ahead and saying, proper investment, I can make this team great again, as we have been. It's not been too long. It's not like a 30-year battle. We've only won the league a few years ago. We can get back to that stage again. Or does he put his hands in his pockets and puff his cheeks out and say, time to move on because I'm not getting backed the way a Champions League and league winning manager should be backed?
Yeah, and we've talked about this in terms of both Klopp and certain players, of whether or not they are in for the long haul. We've talked about it with Klopp. We've talked about it with Mo. We've talked about it with Virgil. Are these guys that are going to, in their current, not necessarily fully diminished state in terms of Mo, but Virgil's getting to that point where we have to say he is diminished. And until he shows us that he's either A, completely healthy, or B, completely quote unquote back, I don't see where it's something where you're building your entire defense around him like we were attempting to 2 years ago. Now Klopp has to look at certain guys and go, there's reinforcements that need to be made, and there's wholesale changes that need to be made. The midfield is something that just needs a complete overhaul. That's been well documented that's the case. But we do need attacking options, guys that have that kind of Gakpo versatility, and you can play them all over the place, and they'll be fine with not starting every game. And as much as it hate to say, the center backs pretty much, Kanate is the only one that you're really just set in stone that he's the guy that he's going to play in one of those spots. And the rest of them are completely up in the air in my eyes. You don't know what you're going to get from any of them. You don't know which ones are going to stay and which ones are going to go. There's a lot of kind of just roster turmoil that needs to be addressed. And if Jurgen doesn't feel as if he's getting the necessary backing to address that, I wouldn't fault him for just packing it up and leaving. As much as I don't want that, I wouldn't fault him for it.
In terms of you make a good point about Virgil. He certainly hasn't been the same since that injury. But now we're starting to question his leadership and organizational skills, which are not things that are dependent on having functioning knees and ankles and muscles. But if we accept that Virgil has passed his best and this isn't just a bad season, that there is something physically at least that's holding him back that maybe is affecting him mentally, that creates now two areas of the field that he really has to fix, plus the problem of gelling the attack together post Mane and now almost likely, certainly post Firmino. Is it too big of a mountain for even the great Jurgen Klopp to climb, or is he the one man on the planet that we can trust to be able to do it?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a matter of trusting him at this point, because we all, despite the complete disaster, and that's what I feel this season has been by the standards that we've set as a club. It's something where the trust isn't there. It's his willingness at this point. It's these conversations I was talking about, him going to these people that write the checks, and he goes, all right, I need this, this, and this. I'm not saying that I need all of this to keep me here, but I would like that. But if you can't give me this, then we have to find a way to get as close to that as humanly possible. And I think those conversations need to start now. So at the end of the year, we're not sitting there just kind of twiddling our thumbs playing will he, won't he go. If they get this all on the table now, and he at the end of the season realizes that it's not going to work, then the offseason can be done searching for a new manager rather than these conversations starting in the offseason, and then we have to panic and we get the Arthur Mello of managers heading into next year. And nobody wants that process to happen.
Brian Child makes a point. There's not another option that's at Jurgen's caliber, and that's probably true. But are we heading for a situation where it's almost horses for courses? Not that we would need to go down the route of Everton hiring Sean Dyche, who is a perfectly placed manager for what their situation is, as has been evident from the results ever since. But perhaps there's a different kind of manager out there, and we mentioned his name before because I think he would actually be an ideal replacement for the level we're going to be at with the players that are leaving, retiring, injured, and getting older. But a Thomas Frank who already knows how to build from scratch with limited resources. We know Jurgen Klopp can do that, but it's been a long time since he's had to. Is it a case that we might have to get our heads around the fact that the current players we have, the current squad, and what we can afford to bring in may demand a different type of manager?
And I've always liked the Thomas Frank shout, because he's a guy that he's done a lot with a little, but it's the way that he's set his team up to succeed was working with the roster he had. It wasn't trying to, okay, we need this guy to play this, even though he's never done it before, or we need this guy to play in a system that he's never played in before. He kind of molded that Brentford team into something both in his image, but also in the image of the players he had at his disposal. He never put a lot of onus on the guys in that midfield to do much more defensive work than he knew they were capable of. Because guys like Janelt and Jensen yeah, they can get around back and forth and all that things, but they're more useful in getting the ball to Tony and Mbuemo, and in doing so in good space off of the way that Brentford gets the ball back. And it's what the way they work is almost how we've asked Henderson to work all these years of when you get the ball, just look up and fire into the channels and hope for the best. And if you get guys like that, you get a manager like that taking that similar philosophy and kind of not making it Gang Press 2.0, but kind of integrating what he wants to do with the skill sets of the guys that we have now, who, and it's not bragging or anything, we have better players than Brentford. It's just a fact. But they've outperformed us because they've all bought into a system and it caters to their strengths. We're not at that'd be like asking Thiago to be something that he's not. And that's a lot of times that we've asked him to do that, try to just be everywhere at once. And at this stage of his career, one, he can't physically do it, and two, he doesn't want to. there's no capability and there's no willingness. So that's a dead spot in terms of the midfield. For all the talents and all the passing he can do, you just have a point with him where it's just a dead spot. And when we're getting overrun in the midfield, he's virtually useless. But you get a guy like Frank that could, I don't know, sculpt out a midfield system to make it so he's not that big of a black hole. I see what we could do more than anything.
Brian Chan says that he likes Thomas Frank, but there's no pressure at Brentford. Let me put that to you, Trevor, because one of the other questions was, is he ready for Brian? Was he ready to make that leap? Is it the case that there's no pressure at Brentford, or is it the case, which I believe is all of that level and pretty much any professional level, and I would say even some youth levels as well, but there's pressure to do the job. You're there to win games regardless. You may not have to win as many as the clubs above you, but you still have to put in that training performance every week. You still have to prepare your team. And Thomas Frank looks very, very good at doing that with the resources he has at his disposal. And as you said, it's not just that his players buy into his system, but his system is uncomplicated enough that it doesn't tax his players' abilities beyond what they're capable of, which seems to be a sin that we are committing game after game after game after game this season. You'll never know what manager is capable of until you put them at the highest level they can go and see what they're able to do. Some flourish, like Jurgen Klopp flourished at Dortmund from Mainz, and Liverpool from Dortmund. Frank Lampard, on the other hand, flourishes at eating cakes, and he should probably stick to that. And I'm glad that Chelsea brought him back so he can collapse their season even more. But then another great example on that now is Graham Potter, who was one of the leading lights of British coaching and just found wanting at that highest level. So Brian makes a very valid point that there is a danger, but are we at the point where that danger might be a risk worth taking? Because if we're not changing our habits now, what's to say that we won't change the next season either?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have become gun shy because of how the Potter experiment went at Chelsea. But I think it's a much different situation because he came from Brighton and brought everybody there, and they were used to that, the way that they did things at Brighton, and then it was just completely thrown off the ship into the middle of the ocean with the amount of players he had to come in and integrate, the amount of tactical changes that he was making on a almost minute by minute basis, because there was so many personalities he had to assuage and all these things that he had to just do. And yeah, that may have been a bridge too far for him. But if we brought Thomas Frank in at the state of our team, I don't think it would be something where, and granted, what the whole Bellingham thing that we talked about before, I don't think we're going to have to worry about giving Thomas Frank 19 players to figure out what the fuck to do with this season. We'll be lucky if we're giving him three new bodies from what he's seen this year. And that's whoever's coming in next, even if it's Jurgen going into next year, it's going to be a lot of the same guys, but you got to just find a way to what we were talking about, just make it more palatable for where they are, both at their careers, both with how long they've played in this system, and just kind of run themselves into the ground in a lot of instances. Kind of just hit the brakes just a bit. And yes, the great Jurgen Klopp needs to figure something out different. You've made it this far on what you've done, but you're going to make it further on what you can do next. And if what he can do next is just a rehash of the same thing, then maybe best for all parties that he goes and finds another league that he can just run a young team into the ground and try his system there. I genuinely think that we've reached a crossroads, both with Jurgen and with just the organization as a whole, because there's the way this season went down, there has to be a lot of, not necessarily wholesale changes, but enough to kind of make the fans and make the people that really run the club feel secure that the direction of things is not, we're not trying to keep level. We're trying to go back up.
Let's move on to the. Let's see if we can get the little title graphics thing to work, because I have some nice little puns for tonight. Okay, so we had Jude looks like a maybe, and then the next song title is Rough Justice. Well, Ref Justice in this case. So what I wanted to talk about, because I actually missed this when it happened, because I missed the first half of the Arsenal game. I think actually missed the entire Arsenal game. I didn't watch it until the highlights, the replays rather. But the assistant ref elbowing Andy Robertson in the mouth. It didn't seem like it was a harsh elbow from, it didn't demand the reaction that Andy Robertson probably gave, although he seemed more like in shock. Like if a grandmother came over and kicked you in the testicles for no apparent reason whatsoever, like your first reaction wouldn't be pain. It would be like, did a grandmother just kick me in the testicles for no reason? Then the pain would come. However, I've watched the video over and over. Maybe somebody else has a different perspective, but I can't see any instance where Andy Robertson touched the referee in a manner that would warrant an elbow to the face. Is this a case of what my belief has been for years, is that the full-time referee thing in England has made a lot of referees want to be the story, as opposed to the past where the mark of a good referee was that you didn't even know they were on the field. And, they did the job quietly and they made sure discipline was maintained. But other than that, you didn't even know the referee's name. But they've almost become a celebrity in themselves in the last 20-odd years. So is it a case of a bit of a misunderstanding? Is it a case of, proper retribution and we're all missing something that Andy Robertson did or said? Or is there any excuse for a referee to do what that particular referee did?
Yeah, and I agree that the whole thing, how it went down, was just kind of odd when you kind of tried to piece together in your head, maybe he said something, because he kind of just tapped him on the shoulder. People were trying to say, oh, he pulled him back. Or if a player came behind a referee that was walking away and he really tried to pull him back, he wouldn't have got the elbow up like that. He would have kind of spun him around. That even a guy of Robbo's size, he would have spun him around. So it was something where he just kind of like tapped him on the shoulder, trying to get his attention, and the guy just must have heard enough and just went for it. And we all have those kind of moments of madness, but for referees, you can't do that. And now I'm not saying this guy's career has to be over. I don't think it needs something where he has to just wear that scarlet letter for the rest of his life, but it is something that needs to be addressed from the front of you have to know where your place is. And like you said, there's a lot of referees that I think almost it's their kink to make bad decisions, so they just read their name in the paper a million times. I don't understand it. I totally agree with your sentiment that the best referee is one that you don't know their name. And there's so many times where I've gone in and done deep dives on referees just because I have a feeling that there's some underlying weird reasoning by some of the choices they make in any given match, Liverpool or not. And that's just that's one deal. And the thing what Brian's talking about in terms of just constantly getting around the refs, creating these kind of just scrum circles around them and just yelling. I'm surprised what happened in Mexico and what happened in the Arsenal game doesn't happen more often. I'm surprised players aren't getting fucking knee in the crotch and elbow in the face on a weekly basis, just from the amount of berating they receive. Now, granted, this is all just kind of a cohesive web of, there wouldn't be as many arguments if there weren't as many as shitty calls. And VAR in a lot of instances was brought in to fix it, and it just keeps making it worse. And a lot of these guys won't even try to I don't want to say they don't try because they're paid to do a job, but there's a lot of guys that they just, it's almost like a youth game where, all right, I just want to get home. My train is in half an hour. I don't want this game to go super long, so I'm just going to let them play. That's the feeling I get with some of these guys sometimes, especially in second halves of like big games where they won't call a foul that's not within 2 feet of the box. And in the end, I don't think Robbo was in the right for selling it the way he did, because come on. But also the ref's reaction was something where you can't do that.
Dave Leslie makes a good point, and I've done referee courses before, and it's always like, at the amateur level, it's always about the game more than it is about yourself. But the level of responsibility that the official has warrants him keeping his cool. It just looks out of character to lift his elbow towards a player. I mean, there is a certain extra responsibility, isn't there, on figures of authority, especially in sports, that they do need to be calm. I mean, we look at tennis referees or tennis line judges, etc., like getting screamed at by tennis players at the pro level, and they have to keep their cool, especially in a sort of gentlemanly, womanly sport like tennis, with all their little foibles and whatnot. But in soccer, especially in the English game, as you said, there's been horrendous calls. VAR has been almost an embarrassing failure in England this season. But it also, when I saw the thing, it just struck me as, you always say that leadership comes from the top and your group takes on the personality of the leader. And unless I'm mistaken, Howard Webb is now the head honcho at the Referees Association, PG, what is it, PG or whatever.
He's either there now or he's taking over.
Or he's taking over.
I believe he's there now.
And he was an incredibly arrogant. I know we have our beefs with him from his time, because he's supposedly a dyed-in-the-wool Man United fan. But he's also an ex-policeman before he became a full-time ref. And there is that like there's a YouTube clip of him with all his little arrogant kind of little reactions to players, lifted their hands off his body, like as if, how dare you touch me, kind of a thing. It's almost there's an arrogance that you maybe think that he's telling the new refs and the young refs they're not to take any crap anymore from the players, but that's not how it should be, really, should it? The players bear a responsibility that they shouldn't be crowding referees, but that's what we have yellow and red cards for, isn't it? Really, that's really the warning signal. Is yeah, you talk to me like that again, it's a yellow, and I'm going to give you the second yellow. Is there a case to be made that at least in England that refereeing is so broken they really need to root and branch the whole thing, and if that means removing Howard Webb, then so be it? Or is it a case that it's a reaction to how players have been acting over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, or whatever?
Yeah, and I think there is trying to kind of stamp that authority, and he is a guy that if anybody ever saw him ref, that he kind of took pleasure in the fact that he was the authority and what he said went. And it, not to say that as a referee you don't want to kind of have that mindset in a certain way, but he was definitely a guy that I thought took joy in sending people off for nothing. He was a guy that liked giving both penalties and dangerous free kicks at dangerous times in the game, because I don't know if in his head he felt that, ooh, look at all this drama I'm adding. Oh my God, look how important I am. And I think a lot of these guys under his leadership have followed suit in that front where, you know what this game really needs? A 6th minute of stoppage time penalty. And I'm going to be the guy that everybody's talking about. No one's going to even remember who took the penalty. They're going to remember me because I had the balls to give it in the 6th minute of 7 minutes of stoppage time. And it's getting that mentality out of England. I think it's a fool's errand at this point. You would have to need to pretty much entirely clean house, which I don't think they're going to. As much as it wouldn't help overnight, because you'd have to get a bunch of guys from different countries and kind of piecemeal it. There needs to be some of these guys that have been refs for as long as they have, either make these rating systems that they supposedly have mean something, and if you fall below a certain threshold, you're just gone. You're just gone. And there's because with the amount of money that's in stake in the Premier League and the amount of jobs that people can gain or lose in a given year, to be in the hands of guys who think that they are the reason that people are in the stadiums, it's just tiresome. Losing out on Europe or getting relegated because some guy wanted to flex in what was at the time a meaningless game between two mid-table teams, that it's something that nobody is ever going to sit there and defend referees on that front. You don't want to see people lose their jobs, but if the referees are causing people around them to lose jobs, why can't they suffer the same fate?
On that note, Alan M says that linesman Konstantin Hatzidakis, or whatever he was let off without a ban or a fine, which almost reinforces what he did, doesn't it? When you talk about, if you're Howard Webb, you're probably clapping into your own reflection in your mirrored room where you can just see yourself from all angles. But talking about Howard Webb, it just reminds me, if you remember Steve Clattenburg, who I thought was a fantastic referee, but he was a bit flash, but he never really kind of made it about himself. It was almost like he stood up to players but that was the extent of it. Whereas, Howard Webb, what was his name? Lee, what's his name? The small fat ball guy that just recently retired. You could tell that they were making the game. They were the show, and all the players around them, and the coaches and the crowd, they were just there to be part of their little show. Just to put a little swerve, a little curveball in. Do you think things would get better if the Premier League took the bold and brave and, I would say, correct step that the Bundesliga did and start introducing female refs, which they should? Lee Mason, thanks, Alan. Lee Mason. I couldn't remember him. It's just probably because he looks like me, bald, fat, and round. But I'm not as insufferable. But yeah, I mean, I've coached games that had female refs, and I thought they were fantastic. In the sense that sometimes I got the feeling, because it was boys' games, I got the feeling that they thought they had to try harder because of the inherent chauvinism against women in especially in soccer, at least. But because of that, they just did a great job, like exactly how you want a referee to be. Do you think that's a plunge that the Premier League should be willing to take, or is that really the best example of why that whole charade is an old boys club, literally?
Yeah, and the way Germany and a couple of the countries on that side of Europe went about it, in terms of they didn't want to make it a spectacle. They ended up doing it just because that's the way the internet works now, and something happens for the first time, everybody needs to really blow it up, even though they were kind of trying to do it on the sly a bit. And I'm sure if England went about instituting female referees, they would have a huge campaign around it. They'd run a parade for her on the opening day, and kind of do whatever it did to put her in the feature match, instead of just going, hey, we just got this really good ref and she just happens to be female, and we're just going to give her normal assignments. And yeah, just make it seem like it's a normal thing, because that's what it should be. And if you kind of relieve that pressure valve immediately and don't make it so everybody has to remember every name of every referee, you don't have to be like, oh, we got the girl ref today, or oh, we got the Manchester United ref today. Hopefully, over time, all that shit just kind of fades into the background, and they just kind of become part of the furniture again. And I'd love to see it. I don't know if Howard Webb is one of those guys who just is so old school. He probably doesn't even think like women should be in the military or something. These are not the views of Howard Webb. I'm just speculating, but
They probably are.
I don't know.
For the benefit of say, we don't know. We're just spitballing.
Yeah.
But we did see a few years ago, and I thought it was highly encouraging. It was Shan Massey, the assistant referee, who I thought she was brilliant. She got. I remember even the most chauvinistic British commentators had to find fault really hard. They had to look really closely to find fault with some of her decisions, like on offsides and things like that, and they never could. And again, it's that stupidly shameful male-dominated patriarchy kind of world thing where women doing like there's literally no reason why gender should come into who's refereeing the game. It's it's down to judgment. It's not down to any other kind of thing. But they have to work that little bit harder just to get the recognition, when often they are better than their male counterparts, but they're not being let in the door. Do you think if we did get to that stage, though, where we're watching the English Premier League and it is just a part of the furniture, it's just a ref. We don't know. We don't care what we don't care what their name is for a start. That would be fantastic. We didn't have to get their names at the start of everything multiple times. And they weren't in the newspapers getting interviewed. But we don't care about the name, we don't care about their gender. Do you think the reaction will be different from players, or do you think that soccer players are, as the rugby people always say, they're just animals anyway, and it doesn't really matter who they're talking to?
And for the first bit of it, I think it's going to be something where I don't think the behavior would change. I think until, like we were talking about, there's consequences for all the crowding and stalling on free kicks and stuff like that. Until people just start getting carded, or, oh, move back 10 yards. Oh, wait, you don't want to move back? All right, we're going to push the ball up 10 yards. Kind of something that they've some of these rules that they've tried to institute. And the second there was any pushback, that is, okay, all right, we'll get rid of it. We'll get rid of it. And there has to come a time where we don't need the officials to be anonymous, but we don't need to have it where you're looking at the match. Just you look at the match day list, and you don't need to really care about who's reffing. You don't need to worry about that. I hope in my lifetime we can reach that point where it doesn't matter. I don't have the highest of hopes. That's the eternal pessimist in me. I can sit here and try to look at the sunny side of certain situations, but in terms of that, and like I said, unless there's a complete clean out and there's lots of changes instituted, there's going to be nothing but a mild deviation from the status quo. And if that is met with any sort of resistance, it will just rubber band right back to the way it is.
And just a nice little segue there to talking of rubber bands and bouncing, etc., etc., etc. We're playing Leeds this weekend on Monday, I believe. It's the Monday evening game. Leeds, formerly a kind of yo-yo club, a tiny little bit in the divisions, finally bounced their way back up to the Premier League. Did okay with Bielsa, then sacked Bielsa, sacked Jesse Marsh, and they're on to, I can't remember his name now. Was it Gavi? What's his name?
Javi Gracia.
Gracia, that's it, Javi Gracia. Is this going to be yet another one of those banana skins for us where we're playing a relegation threatened team and they suddenly look like Brazil 1970 and we look like Alan Brazil in 1970? Or are we at the stage now where we've nothing else to lose, so we're just going to go for games and we're going to play them accordingly to the in terms of the opposition?
I really have no. I was going to say hope, but that just seems very just dark. My thing with the rest of this season is there's no expectations. That's the way I'm looking for. There's no expectations. I want to see, but I do want to see teams like Leeds, in kind of the disarray that they're in, get dealt with accordingly. Don't make it so that they can kind of do what they did earlier in the season and get that late Somerville goal. The plants outside. It's 88 degrees in Rhode Island, so the plants are outside. They're in their natural habitat now, but it's something where I don't want to keep the habit up of playing down to teams, and not to say that Leeds is a team that can't on their day run with us, and with the players they have, they can just kind of do that Brentford thing where they can just run with us and kind of make any countering useless. There's a lot of ways that Leeds can counter what we do effectively, but shouldn't be able to because they're in just such dire straits defensively. We need to kind of pounce on them early and make the fact that they can counter what we do rendered useless. But I I I think I've tried a couple times to get the we score first thing off the board, and while yeah, it's happened a couple times, it hasn't really led to much of anything. So I'd like to think that we can kind of just put our foot on leads to start things and kind of just get an early goal and then try some shit. It seems a bit just flippant, but get a goal and then see what you got with some of these guys that you don't know whether or not you're going to keep them. And a guy that has been talked about a ton, like Fabio Carvalho. You're either going to have to shit or get off the pot with him at some point. You don't play him in his right spot. You don't give him opportunities to try in where he could flourish. He gets about 1 minute a month. Just use it like a reverse preseason at this point, but do it in a way where you're not jeopardizing the points at hand.
I mean, to be fair to Carvalho, though, 1 minute per month is he's getting more time in the field than I get set, so he's doing quite well, to be fair. But a good point, like in terms of we don't want to talk about Carvalho, but does it strike you that he would almost be a star on this Leeds team we're about to play, and he can't get any minutes on the Liverpool team he's currently at?
Yeah, and a lot of these guys that we'll talk about. Oh man, if they could just get a loan move, I go. We can't loan anybody out. We need bodies. We need to figure out where these guys fit here, not figuring out where they fit on other teams, especially in the same league. There's just send them back to Fulham for you. Fulham are like almost direct competition with us right now, even though their season's completely been double red carded to hell. But that's I don't want to figure out where other players are going to go. Those that are going to leave in the summer, let them figure out where they're going. The guys that are here, we got to figure out how to work them in. And if you can't, then I don't want to see loans. Because if you can't figure out during a lost season what guys are useful to your club going forward, then maybe either all those players need to go and you need to start from scratch, or the people making the decisions need to go. And we got to find some people that can really work with what we have. And just to keep using the word work over and over again, make it work. Make what we have effective and useful.
Brian says he has no predictions, no expectations, and he wants to see commitment. Do you think it would be a bad example of how the team is going if we can't muster commitment for these last 9 games? Because with nothing to lose, now it's literally about pride in their own performance. And if we can't see that pride, is that a damning indictment on, number one, the culture that Jurgen has allowed to flourish, and number two, the quality of the character? To quote Brendan Rodgers' quote for Alan Walnut, but an indictment on their character that they can't motivate themselves when there's nothing at stake.
Yeah, and that goes back to my point of we got to figure out which guys are here for the long haul, and you have to be able to kind of compartmentalize. Not every game is going to be the flashy European Cup final. You're going to have some slogs in every season, and there's times where we're not going to be in everything. We've been a bit spoiled with being in everything for so long as we've been for the past few years, and having all of these fronts to fight on. it's easy to stay locked in when you have all of those stakes. It's much more difficult to stay locked in when there are none. And guys who can't stay locked in regardless, there needs to be questions asked of whether or not you are going to be somebody that we can trust. And yeah, there's and Brian's kind of letting Timuchin's favorite player go before he's even gone. There's, I'm not saying that Ox is a guy that should just be kind of frozen out of the team for the rest of the season, but yeah, we already know what's there. Guys that we don't know what's there, like the person who doesn't exist, Calvin Ramsey. There's guys. If you think Gomez is a guy that deserves, oh yeah, I don't know. I don't know who he is. I think I just made a name out of thin air.
I think he's on the Ted Lasso show.
Played random word generator, and it just came out that way. But there's so many guys that really need this last run out to get quality run and figure out their best place on the team, their most effective place, and whether or not they're to be trusted going forward.
So on that note, because that nicely dovetails into what I was going to ask next, let's assume that there is going to be, as Brian says, a separation factor. We're going to see some players who are, there to be there, and we're going to see some players maybe on Monday, but certainly in the next 9 games, who are just picking up the paycheck at this point because there's no medals, there's no silver and glinting gold at the end of the season of old for them. I'm going to throw some names out there. Andy Robertson, Kanate, Milner, Henderson, Gakpo, and Nunes for me, that's the list of players right now that I can think of, and Harvey Elliott, that will not let us down and will go hell for leather in every game, regardless of who we're playing or what we're playing for. Is there anybody else to add to that list? Do you disagree with anybody on that list? And then finally, am I correct in saying that after that, we are literally looking at a bunch of players who have questionable motivation at this point?
I think the only person I'd add to that list is Allison.
I deliberately didn't put Allison in, so I should have said Allison, but because he doesn't really run, if you know what I mean. Like, yeah. he's a great goalkeeper, but the rest of them have to cover miles to show, that their intensity is there. And I'm including Salah in that because I often see Salah, as great as he is with the ball, not necessarily tracking back as much as you would like him. I didn't put Firmino in there. We know he'll give us a shift, but he's not here next year, so I'm not worried about what he will or won't do, because we know he's not going to be there more or less. And I'm not including Diaz just because he's injured, but he's never let us down as far as I can make out. But just players that are definitely available and that we don't have to worry about, collapsing, walking up the steps or something like that, and going back out onto the injury table. But out of the rest of them, I'm not. It sounds shocking, but I'm not wrong. I don't think, or do you agree whether I'm correct or not? The rest of the players you can almost see could give you a bad performance or a good performance, and we can't tell which it's going to be.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the horror show of this season. Of there's days, and I'm just going to pick the two guys that I think have been the subject of the most ire of a lot of people is Fabinho and Trent. Because Fabinho is a guy that worked as a double pivot by himself for a couple of years, where he was a play killer. He was a guy that was able to get the ball off of the most creative of people, find Hendo, and start breaks like nothing. And he just seems a guy that's either a combination of disinterested, lost, hurt. There's a shell of a man in that spot. And Trent is a guy that is just, I don't know if the Fabinho Henderson combination has deteriorated to the point where he can't do the thing. He can't make the movements that he used to make willy-nilly anymore because he doesn't have that quality, consistent cover, or the fact that it was kind of just papering over the cracks, and now we see the foundation for what it really is with him. And I'm not saying, well, we got to move him to midfield then, and because it's a guy that he deserves to be in his spot, but there has to be if you're going to play him to his strengths, there has to be that cover that comes in and makes up for his deficiencies. And if you don't have that, then him as a player is fairly useless for all his great passing, for all his vision, for all his ability to get the ball into the right spot at the right time. If he's leaving 45 yards of space behind him completely untouched 7 or 8 times a half, that's a useless player to me. And if you can't have guys that are going to, like Brian said, if we're not going to give him somebody to kind of put a fucking fire up his ass to figure out whether or not he is that committed to either A, improving defensively, or B, being vocal enough to go, hey, I'm going to go up here and do what I do best. One of y'all motherfuckers has to come back here and take care of business behind me. And when I get back, we can kind of just do our little Bermuda Triangle of fun. And I don't know if he either has that willingness to speak up or if he has that willingness to defend. He has to find one or the other, because if he doesn't, then he's just a luxury. He's the Thiago of the defense. Where oh look at that great pass that he did. Oh, look at that lovely bombing run up the edge that he did. That's all well and good. If he loses the ball, there's nothing that's stopping a guy like Saka or any of these guys on City that can just get that ball 3 passes and they're gone. If we can't get some fix on that, the Fabinho, Trent, Hendo combo, however you want to situate it, if we can't get any fix on that, then there needs to just be something different.
In terms of, I'm not going to ask for a score prediction this week because for one, the scores don't matter at this point, really. But in terms of, if you were to call the performance, are we going to be looking back, regardless of the scoreline, are we going to be looking back at the end of Tuesday or Monday evening and saying, yes, that's what we're capable of doing? Or are we going to say, sack them all, that was disastrous? Or is it just too hard to call with this group of players this season?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be in the sack them all camp, but I do feel that the single game Monday Night Football frustration, I can feel it seeping in already. This isn't just sweat. This is frustration oozing through my pores. There's going to be something just goofy that happens in that game that is going to set everybody off. My phone is going to be, I'm going to be at work and I'm just going to see the Discord notifications and I'm just going to be like, oh, something horrible has happened. And then my ride home is going to be listening to the radio talk for an hour about that horrible thing that happened. That's what it could still be in a win or a draw. But if it's just the early kicks on Saturday and the Monday and the Friday games, I just they're the shits. I don't like them. And I never have good feelings about them. Even when we were at our peak, Monday, Friday, and early kick Saturday games, just they're the shits.
Well, let's hope this one books that trend. Before we go to our threshold question, it's going to be a moral dilemma one tonight, Trevor. Here's your moral dilemma. Which would you rather have? One of two things is going to happen in the universe when you click your Thanos fingers. So everything get relegated, never to see the light of day in the Premier League ever again. But the trade-off is we don't win the league or the Champions League under Jurgen Klopp. Or Manchester United never win a major trophy ever again in their existence, but AC Milan wins 2005 3-0. Which do you pick?
Yeah, I think this just goes back to my recency bias, because I don't have as much hate in my heart for Everton as a lot of kind of
older people like me
experienced Liverpool from a different perspective. That I the Everton in my lifetime has always kind of drawn more pity than anger, whereas Manchester United has provided me from both my friends who are fans of them and just from the team in general a lot of consternation. So if I could make it so they are rendered neutered for their existence and not getting that night in Istanbul, but you get some stuff down the road. I root for enough teams that I've seen one championship for in my life, and that holds me over. If I lose that magical night just to completely and spitefully neuter Manchester United, I think that's the one I'll take.
Well, when you think about it, though, every night would be magical then if you knew Manchester United couldn't win a single trophy, no matter how hard they tried or how much they spent. So probably a good answer. So just remains to say then, thank you to everybody for watching, listening, and commenting, especially our usual regulars. It's always good to hear from you. There's no EPL fantasy show after this. It returns next week. I believe the morning coffee show is on in the morning. Make sure you like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Bebo, Vivo, the US Mail, whatever you want to like us on. And follow the Discord channel. It's a great place, a great forum to talk about Liverpool and to laugh at Trevor's plant. And then we will see you next week, hopefully with less technical difficulties, with a few more graphics. And of course, me and Trevor and whoever else we can get to join us for more talk. And then hopefully, as I said, we'll be talking about a good performance on Monday and looking forward to something continuing rather than, tearing what's left of my hair out and giving myself free haircuts because things just went south yet again. But thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Trevor, for being with us again and being awesome. Thank you to all the boys and girls who've been listening and commenting. Enjoy your weekend. Let's hope Monday books the trend and we get something for our efforts, which we hope will be actual efforts this time and not some facsimile of the Liverpool we know and love. So, see everybody soon and peace out.